The Son of Neptune is the second book in the Heroes of Olympus series by Rick Riordan. It is also a sequel to The Lost Hero. In this video, I'll be giving my thoughts and opinions on this book, and as always, I have to give a spoiler warning for those who haven't read this book. And now, let's get started. For me, I'd rate this book a 4.8 out of 5. I really enjoyed reading it, and it was really hard to put down. In this book, we get to meet a bunch of new characters and are introduced to the Roman camp called Camp Jupiter. This book takes place 6 months after the events of The Lost Hero, and like I said from my review of The Lost Hero, a cliffhanger was left to the audience, and going into this book, I was so hyped. My initial thought of seeing the title Son of Neptune was referring to Percy Jackson because Percy is the son of Poseidon, and Poseidon's Roman form is called Neptune. After reading this, I realized I was correct. Percy is the son of Neptune the title is referring to. To give a quick summary, the book is about Percy Jackson reaching Camp Jupiter and meeting Frank Zhang and Hazel Levesque. The three of them ended up going to a quest to free the god of death Thanatos, who's being locked up by Gaia's forces, and because he's locked up, nobody could die. They go through a bunch of obstacles until a full attack on Camp Jupiter happens, and the three of them saves the day. Like The Lost Hero, the book has 3 perspectives, and each are for new demigods. The first perspective was for Percy, the second for Hazel, and the third for Frank. The book starts out with Percy being chased by Gorgons named Steno and Euryale, who are almost unkillable, and Percy has no memory about his life or even who he is. The only thing he can remember, however, was one name, and that name is Annabeth. If you've read the original 5 Percy Jackson books, then you'd know that Annabeth Chase was Percy's girlfriend. Personally, I love this detail because this just proves how strong Percy's relationship is with Annabeth, and throughout this book, he uses that one memory as some sort of beacon of hope, and he's scared that he might even forget her. The Gorgons want to kill Percy because Percy killed their sister, Medusa, 4 years ago, and this is of course referring to the Lightning Thief, when Percy beheaded Medusa. He manages to escape them and meets an old lady named June. June makes him carry her across a river, and Percy does this. By doing so, he lost the curse of Achilles. If you need to refresh your memory on that, in The Last Olympian, Percy dipped himself in the deadly river Styx in the underworld, and when a demigod does this, he or she becomes invulnerable, except for one spot, and the only way to kill them is to stab that one spot. It's called the Curse of Achilles because Achilles was the first demigod to do this. Percy eventually reaches the borders of Camp Jupiter, and there, he meets Hazel and Frank. The three of them fight off the Gorgons, and Percy ends it by controlling a nearby river to engulf them. After that, June suddenly transforms and becomes the Roman goddess Juno, or the Roman counterpart of Hera. Juno announces that Percy is the son of Neptune, and that he had been sleeping for months. Percy is then interviewed by Reina Avila Ramirez Arellano, the praetor or the leader of Camp Jupiter. Percy felt as if he knew her, and he tells her that he's been training with the wolf goddess Lupa, and that's all he remembers. Hazel goes on to tell Reina about how brave Percy fought against the Gorgons, which made Percy uncomfortable. Reina is curious and confused about Percy because, for her, he's no ordinary demigod. The reason for this was because Percy was a Greek demigod, while Reina, Hazel, Frank, and the rest of Camp Jupiter were Roman demigods. The conversation goes on to Jason Grace, Reina's fellow praetor who's been missing for 8 months, and Percy thinks that Reina had feelings for Jason. Reina tells them to go talk to her sister and leader of the Amazons, Hyla, for help. Percy then gets interviewed by Octavian, an augur and the legacy of Apollo. He had broken teddy bears all around the place, and while reading, I was wondering why they were there. Then, he proceeds to grab Percy's stuffed panda, stab it on the stomach, and placed its stuffing in the altar, and I was like, why did you just do that? Then, he says, "Good news! Percy may join the Legion. We'll assign him a cohort at evening muster. Tell Reina that I approve." In this chapter, I learned that Hazel wasn't so fond of Octavian, and apparently, Octavian wanted to replace Jason as praetor since Jason had been missing. Also, he's been blackmailing Hazel, telling her that there were awful rumors about her. Then, he mentions that Hazel's brother was at camp, and Hazel and Percy goes out to meet him. When they get there, I could not believe what I was reading. Hazel's brother was Nico de Angelo. It makes sense because Hazel was the daughter of Pluto, and Pluto's Greek counterpart is Hades, who was Nico's dad. Nico was a character from the original Percy Jackson series, and he and Percy had quite a rocky relationship. He was first introduced in the Titan's Curse as this joyful and jolly kid who loved to play mytho magic, but in the same book, Nico's sister Bianca died, which devastated Nico. To make it worse, Percy actually promised to Nico that he'd keep Bianca safe, and ever since then, he's never been the same again. Percy feels like he recognized Nico, and Nico and Hazel talk in private. Nico assures Hazel that he does not know Percy, and Hazel suddenly has this flashback on her birthday. It turns out that Hazel was from a different timeline, and that she died to delay the rise of one of Gaia's children. She was brought back to the living by Nico through the now open Doors of Death. The Doors of Death were personal gateways used by the death god Thanatos, and this gateway is supposed to be closed because dead people could escape through these doors and into the land of the living. Now, the doors are open because Gaia and her giants were able to take control of them. The awful rumors that Octavian was talking about were the rumors that she was cursed because the jewels Hazel could summon from the ground caused bad things to happen to people. This curse happened to her because her mother, Marie Levesque, was tired of being poor and wished to Pluto that she could have all the riches in the world. Pluto tried to warn Marie that it was too greedy of a wish, but because of Marie's persistence, he granted it. The curse on the jewels was the consequence of the wish, and according to a brief encounter with Pluto, only a son of Neptune could erase the curse. Instantly, I realized the bond that Hazel and Nico had because both of them were somehow preserved in time. Nico being from 1932 and preserved in the Lotus Casino for decades, until he was discharged from it by an unknown person, and Hazel going back to the land of the living after spending her years in the underworld. Hazel wonders if Percy is the son of Neptune that will erase her curse, and she talks to him about how Camp Jupiter works. She explains that Camp Jupiter is composed of New Rome, Temple Hill, and the Principia. She goes on to how Camp Jupiter is divided into 5 groups called cohorts, and that each cohort has a leader called Centurion. The Principia is where the praetors stay, Temple Hill is where the statues of the gods are, and New Rome is where the demigods stay to get married, study, have kids, and retire. I have to admit that if you compare Camp Half-Blood to Camp Jupiter is stricter and more organized, with specific names, locations, and things to do in camp, when in Camp Half-Blood, it's more free and friendly. Percy asks Hazel which cohort he belongs to, and Hazel brings him to the 5th cohort. He notices that people don't like the 5th cohort, and Hazel says that the 5th cohort used to be the best cohort, but during a quest, they lost the eagle, which is the symbol of Camp Jupiter, and this led to the 5th cohort being the worst cohort. Another thing to add was that Jason Grace, a son of Jupiter and the now missing praetor, chose to be in the 5th cohort so that he could change his reputation, and through a quest on Mount Orthes, where he led the camp to break down the Titan's forces, and where he defeated the Titan Krios himself with hand-to-hand combat, the reputation of the 5th cohort started to look up. Because of this quest, Jason became praetor, but because of his disappearance, the 5th cohort's reputation was being tarnished once more. Then, we get Frank's first chapter in this book, and we get a glimpse of his past and his life. I have to admit that the author, Rick Riordan, did an amazing job of making his characters diverse through flashbacks and perspectives. Also, I have to note that both Hazel and Frank's perspectives admit at least once that they liked each other, and personally, I find that so cute. We also learned that Frank was a descendant of so many generations, from Chinese to Canadians, and that Frank was a legacy of Poseidon. Because he was so blessed, he was considered to be a dangerously powerful person, and was decreed that he would have a short life. Hera came into his house on the night of his birth and gave him a wooden stick, and said that if it burned entirely, Frank would die along with it. We also get to hear that Frank was blessed with a family gift, which he inherited from Periclymenus, an Argonaut. After this, a war game was held, and while playing, everyone is impressed by Percy's battle skills and instincts, which he got during the events of the first series. At the end of it, Mars, the Roman counterpart of Ares, comes in and announces that Frank is his son. I was shocked by this because I didn't see how Frank could be a son of Mars, because Frank is way more kind and considerate. Frank was stunned as well because he had been thinking that Apollo was his father because he was an archer and Apollo was the god of archery. Percy acts bitter towards Mars because, in the original series, Percy dueled his Greek form Ares and won. Mars tells Frank that he should go to a quest with Hazel and Percy to free the god of death Thanatos, and the 3 of them are given the Roman ship called the Pax. When they arrive on land, Hazel gets attacked by these creatures called Carpoi, but Percy and Frank were able to defeat them. They then meet Iris, the goddess of rainbows, and I was once again surprised when she offered Frank to turn away from the gods and live his life without any prophecy or wooden stick controlling him. Apparently, Iris had resigned from her job on Olympus and wanted to get a fresh start on life. She tells Frank to go seek Phineas to learn where Thanatos was being held hostage. The trio go to Phineas in Portland and meet a harpy named Ella. It turns out that Phineas wants to keep Ella captive because Ella was an intelligent harpy who somehow memorized the lost Sibylline books of countless prophecies that went missing during the Roman Empire. From the Gorgons who attacked Percy, Frank was able to get 2 vials of their blood. One of them heals a person, and the other one is fatal. Percy does not know which one of them is safe, but bargains with Phineas that if Percy gets the safe one, then Phineas has to tell them where Thanatos was. But if Percy lost, Phineas, who was blind because of a curse made by Zeus, would get his sight back. On a piece of paper, Phineas wrote where Thanatos was, and the 2 of them drink the blood, and Phineas lost. They then meet the Amazons, who are also working for the online company Amazon.com. When they meet Hyla, Percy recognizes her, and I was shocked when he put the pieces together. He had met both Hyla and Reyna in the book The Sea of Monsters, when Percy and Annabeth were on Circe's island, and during that encounter, Percy and Annabeth accidentally destroyed their house. It turns out that Hyla and Reyna were held captive by the men Circe turned into pigs, and ultimately escaped and went their separate ways. Hyla recognizes Percy and was about to kill him when Hazel tells her that Reyna sent them. Hyla orders her guards to take Percy and Frank to jail cells and talks to Hazel in private. She reveals that she was under a difficult situation because Otrera, the former leader of the Amazons, was brought back by Gaia and plans to kill Hyla in a fight. Because Thanatos was locked up, nobody could die and they couldn't end the fight. Otrera came and Hyla gives Hazel a way to free Percy and Frank from their cells. Hazel does this and tames a horse named Orion, who she met very briefly back in her former life. Then, my second most favorite scene happened. I was at the edge of my seat as the trio fought and worked together to fend off Otrera's guards, and we get to see how powerful Hazel is. The trio managed to escape and enter Frank's grandmother's house. There, Mark speaks to Frank privately and talks about the family gift, and that Frank, Percy, and Hazel were part of the ancient prophecy of 7, the prophecy that states that 7 half-bloods would one day cause Gaia's defeat. From The Lost Hero, Jason, Piper, and Leo were said to be a part of it, and now we have 3 more demigods to add up to who the 7 half-bloods are, making there be 6 half-bloods, and that they have to find 1 more demigod to complete it. Mars continues that there are giants outside the house, and that they'd attack in the morning. The next day, the giants attacked and the house burned down along with Frank's grandmother. While reading this, I felt sad and sorry for Frank because he just watched his own house burn right in front of him, along with his grandmother, the person who raised him as a kid. After surviving a couple more obstacles, they finally reached the Hubbard Glacier and found Thanatos, and this scene is by far my most favorite part in the book. Thanatos says that the chains that were binding him couldn't be removed without fire, and I was stunned when Frank volunteered to use his wooden stick to make the fire. And I just love the line he says after that. He said, "If I'm going to burn, it might as well be bright." Hazel fights Alcyonus, and Percy defends Frank from hundreds of creatures called Shades. Percy also managed to get the Eagle of Camp Jupiter, and Frank eventually freed Thanatos. Seeing that the situation was getting out of hand, Frank tries to use his family gift that Mars, his grandmother, and his mother kept telling him. He then realizes that the gift was shape-shifting after he went back to the time when his mother told him as a kid, "Always remember, Frank, you have a special gift. You can be anything." Frank transforms into an eagle and then a bear and knocks Alcyone unconscious. Percy thrusts his sword riptide to the glacier, and this causes the Shades and Percy to fall into the water. Alcyone wakes up and is in a daze, but Frank and Hazel manage to defeat him. Percy gets up from the water, and the 3 of them gather weapons and ride on Orion to Camp Jupiter. Because Percy drank the safe Gorgon blood, Percy was able to regain his memory, and they see that Camp Jupiter was under attack. Percy takes charge and leads the Romans into the battle, and with the help of a minor god named Terminus, he was able to kill a giant named Polybotes. After the battle, the Romans made Percy praetor, and Hera confronts him through a dream. She explains to Percy her plan of uniting Camp Half-Blood and Camp Jupiter to fight against Gaia, and that a ship called the Argo II will set sail to meet them. She also warns Percy that Annabeth had a tough task at her hand, and I was wondering if this had something to do with the next book's title, which was The Mark of Athena. Percy tells this to Reyna, and the book ends with them waiting for the Argo 2. Now, I'll be answering the question, Camp Half-Blood or Camp Jupiter? I love both camps, and I really wish I could visit both of them, but if I'd pick which one I like better, it would be Camp Half-Blood. I think the reason why I prefer Camp Half-Blood is because I've spent much more time reading about how homey it is, and like I said earlier, if you compare Camp Half-Blood and Camp Jupiter, Camp Half-Blood has less restrictions, it's more friendly, and you can get claimed by your godly parent faster, thanks to Percy making the gods swear in the river Styx. Overall, the book was a thrilling and fun book to read. I definitely prefer this one over The Lost Hero, mainly because we finally get a glimpse of what's been happening to Percy, and we are introduced to Camp Jupiter. The reason why it's a 4.8 is because there were times when the book was a bit slow due to a lot of information about Camp Jupiter and the new characters, but nevertheless, I really enjoyed it. I'm so excited to see what would happen through the series and how the prophecy would slowly unfold and start to make more sense. I'm also anticipating Percy and Annabeth reuniting in the next book, The Mark of Athena. So how about you? Which do you prefer? Camp Half-Blood or Camp Jupiter? Let me know in the comments down below.